I never thought a backyard could become a battleground until one summer afternoon when I watched a smiling stranger post a photo of herself in my pool, like she'd always owned the place. It was the kind of picture that makes your stomach drop. Sun on the water, a champagne glass, a caption about community perks, and a name none of us had ever invited. That three-line post turned a quiet life into something I had to decide how to answer. My name's Eli Harper. I work with my hands. I mow my own lawn. I taught my daughter how to swim in that pool one slow July, and I paid for every tile and light with overtime hours and late-night side gigs. We moved into Willow Ridge because it felt safe cul-de-sac, kids on bikes, barbecues that actually sounded neighborly. For the first few years, it was exactly that. Mornings with coffee on the patio, Maya hanging laundry, the way the sun hit the plum tree in October. Then Marla Whitcomb moved 2 doors down, and, for a while, she was just another neighbor with perfect hair and a watch that never quit. At first, it was little things: a garden chair left on my side of the fence, a tray of plastic cups at dusk where our grill was, a face in the window. I told myself it was nothing. You forgive neighbors. You chalk it up to absent-mindedness. But then she started showing up in the background of our family photos, laughing with people she'd never bothered to introduce herself to. And every time I asked her politely to respect our yard, she smiled, patted my shoulder like I was being quaint, and walked away. The real turning point was that selfie. She'd been at a party in someone else's yard, apparently, then jumped into my pool and posted it as if she'd been invited. The caption called it a neighborhood amenity. People commented, some cheering, some laughing, and someone tagged the HOA president like it was a clever bit of civic cheerleading. I watched the comments tilt the story away from what had actually happened, and in that tilt was humiliation. There's a private anger that comes from watching someone rewrite your life into a punchline. I tried the right things first. I walked over with coffee and a smile, said, "Hey, Marla, I'm glad you're enjoying the summer, but this is private property." She cocked her head and said, "Private? Honey, this is Willow Ridge. We all share in the good stuff." It was deliberate phrasing meant to flatten me. I filed a complaint with the HOA. I asked the board to enforce the rules. Harold, the HOA president, nodded and said bland things about policy and process, which, in Willow Ridge, translated to weeks of polite voicemail loops. Meanwhile, neighbors who'd once waved at our kids to come play had started posting snapshots of their own pool days with Marla tagged, like she'd become the unofficial mascot of summertime. What I felt then was equal parts outrage and embarrassment, the kind that sits in your ribs and makes you quieter at dinner. I started documenting phone clips, timestamps, the way she'd leash in friends and plant them like props near our cherry tree. I didn't tell Maya everything, not at first. She saw the dark circles, the way I'd stare at the screen after scrolling through her posts. "Let it go," she said once, and I heard the tiredness in her voice, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't want our life to be a courtroom. There's a moment in every story like this where you choose a path: legal fight, endless polite confrontation, or something else. I'm not proud of how I thought about it. I thought about what would make people stop treating my backyard like an open set. I thought about vanity and social currency, about how Marla seemed to feed off being seen. I thought about how small-town reputations become a currency harder to reclaim than any fence. I'm going to be blunt here. I made a choice that sits heavy with me when I replay it. I didn't go the file suit and wait route because the waiting felt like consent to Marla's narrative. I didn't want to be the guy who told a story to friends and neighbors while another, louder story lived on the internet. So I set a trap, not a violent trap, not something that would cause lasting injury, but something that would interrupt the script she kept writing. I decided I would force a scene, make the truth of trespass visible and undeniable. That's the line where some will cheer and some will judge, and that's the line I cross in the middle of Act 2. The execution was less cinematic than you might expect. No smoke and mirrors, just a late night of careful watching and a decision I thought I could live with. I left cameras running, recorded the way people came in like it was their right, and waited for the day Marla would treat my pool like a public stage again. When she did, it didn't play out the way she planned. The party started with laughter and selfies and casual arrogance, the kind that makes someone feel immune to consequences, and then the water did something strange that afternoon. It clouded, people coughed, and within minutes, the backyard looked like a bad commercial. Hair frizzed, eyes stung, champagne glasses dropped. People scrambled, shrieking, grabbing towels. It was messy and unglamorous and wholly human. I watched from the side with a camera, thinking I could step in, thinking I would. Somewhere between the shrieks and the poolside panic, I felt the smallest stab of triumph, and then an equal measure of sickness. Watching someone you despise in distress feels different when it's real and messy. Suddenly, you're not the director of justice. You're a witness to harm. Marla looked at me across the lawn, fury, confusion, then the split-second calculation of someone whose image had been her armor. "You did this," she spit, incredulous and raw. I didn't answer. Afterward, the neighborhood had footage. Not my private video alone, but phones and shaky clips uploaded by half the cul-de-sac, because when something dramatic happens in a small place, the urge to record is like breathing. I walked into the next HOA meeting with a USB stick and a quietness that felt like armor. Harold could no longer clear his throat and say policy, while neighbors sat and watched my footage on a projector. Marla in my pool, Marla slipping and coughing, Marla trying to smile through discomfort. The board moved fines, a temporary ban from common areas, a public reprimand. The crowd's applause when the motion passed was something I hadn't expected. It felt like validation and something colder, like collective satisfaction at a fall. But the cleanup after a public reckoning is never tidy. Some people thanked me in the weeks that followed. Some patted my back like a man whose rights had been defended. My inbox filled with messages, "You did what the HOA wouldn't, about time." Others called me a vigilante. Marla's social media emptied out like a deflated balloon. An older neighbor confided that she'd always been grandstanding to cover her own fears. Maya watched it all with that calm that comes from someone trying to measure justice against consequences. "We have it back," she said one night, and I could feel the relief in her voice. But there was a thread of worry underneath. "But what did it cost?" she added softly, and I knew she wasn't talking about money. There were consequences I hadn't anticipated. Marla filed complaints of her own, hired a lawyer for a short, angry week, and then retreated to the quieter corners of social life. She knocked on a few doors looking for sympathy and got, at best, polite distance. And me? I sat on the back steps the evening after it all cooled and watched my kids cannonball into the pool like it was just another summer day. The water glinted, ordinary and forgiving. I felt two things at once, satisfied that boundaries had been drawn and guilty that I had been the hand to draw them. The final scene is less tidy than I wanted to be, because real life doesn't give you tidy bows. Willow Ridge got quieter, Marla got smaller in the gossip chain. We regained some of our old rhythms. Yet every time I pass a window and someone smiles way too broadly in a photo, I remember how easy it is for people to rewrite each other's truths. I remember the felt line between protecting your family and becoming someone you used to call a neighbor. I remember the shot of Marla's face in the footage, not triumphant, not wicked, just human and unexpectedly vulnerable, and it keeps me awake sometimes, thinking about the thin line between justice and spectacle. So here's what I want you to wrestle with, because this part matters more than which side you pick. When someone takes what's yours and turns it into their stage, how do you respond? With patience, with law, with a counterpunch that leaves a scar? Is the public exposure of wrongdoing a legitimate tool, or does it descend into its own ugliness when used as revenge? Is there a point where standing up for yourself makes you the thing you hated? I don't have a neat answer. I have evenings where I think I did right, and mornings where I think I should have done better. If I could do one thing differently, maybe I'd have pushed harder with the HOA earlier, documented everything and gone at it with patience. Maybe I'd have asked Maya to sit with me and talk through the plan before I let anger be the pilot. That's the part one can't wash away with a hose or a public apology. Tell me what you think. If you were in my shoes, where would you draw the line and why? Was I right to force a reckoning, or did I cross into something dangerous? Drop a comment below, share a time your community boundaries were crossed, and tell me whether justice looks like restoration or exposure to you.